Imagine a night so still, so completely quiet, that even your own footsteps feel louder than the world around you. A night without the soft glow of a window, without the hum of passing cars, without the comforting spill of street lamps. Just gentle darkness, stretching across villages, towns, and vast open roads. People once lived their entire evenings in that calm silence. Welcome back to Boring History for Sleep, where we wander through forgotten corners of the past, slowly, softly, and peacefully. Tonight, we drift into the world of nights long before electricity, long before gas lamps, long before the glow of cities touched the sky. How did people find their way? How did they move through such deep, quiet evenings? And how did entire communities build routines around the natural rise and fall of the sun? We'll explore all of that, step by gentle step. But before we sink deeper into this calm journey through the night, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment. Maybe share where you're listening from, or what historical era helps you fall asleep. Your support helps this peaceful channel continue making calm stories like this one. Now settle in, breathe slowly. Let's begin our quiet walk into the darkness of history. There was a time, not so long ago in the great timeline of human history, when the simple act of stepping outside after sunset felt entirely different from how we experience it today. If you were to imagine a village from several centuries ago, you wouldn't see rows of windows glowing with bright bulbs or lanterns hanging from posts on every corner. Instead, evening arrived with a soft, steady dimming, like a blanket slowly being pulled across the land. And once the last line of twilight faded, the world surrendered to darkness, complete, unbroken, and deeply peaceful. For people living in those centuries, darkness was not merely the absence of light. It was a natural rhythm that shaped every part of life. It told them when to rest, when to gather, when to finish their work, and when to wait for the next sunrise. Sunset carried a message that everyone understood. Slow down, soften your steps, and let the day end gently. Imagine standing on a path outside a small town during a quiet evening centuries ago. The air would be cooler, carrying the scent of wood, damp earth, or distant fields. The last hints of daylight would fade behind the hills, leaving a faint silver glow in the sky. Slowly, that glow would withdraw, allowing night to take over fully. There would be no distant headlights, no neon signs, no lamps flickering above the streets. Just a soft stretch of darkness, settling across everything in view. In such a world, people adapted naturally. They didn't rush to fill the night with artificial brightness. They simply moved slower, spoke softer, and accepted that night belonged to calmness, not activity. Walking through that darkness required patience, attentiveness, and a certain quiet confidence. The road may have been familiar during the day, but night transformed it. Shapes softened, sounds became more pronounced, and direction came more from memory than from sight. Most people living in villages rarely traveled at night unless it was truly necessary. For them, the darkness wasn't frightening. It was simply difficult to navigate. The unevenness of paths, the presence of stones or roots, the unpredictable dip of a road, all these details required attention. So, people moved carefully, guiding themselves not only with what they could faintly see, but with what they remembered. In many regions, homes were built close to one another, forming tight clusters that made evening movement easier. When one person stepped outside with a small source of light, a handheld torch, a candle shielded in a metal or wooden frame, or even a simple ember carried in a holder, the glow might gently reflect off nearby walls. It wasn't bright, but it was enough to find a doorway or a familiar turn. Imagine the soft, warm shimmer of a candle moving slowly between houses. Its light wasn't powerful enough to illuminate a whole street, but it cast a gentle halo around the person carrying it. As they walked, the glow would sway slightly with each step, creating long, dancing shadows on the ground. People learned to read these shadows like a quiet map. A narrow shadow meant a wall was close. A wide, open patch meant they were stepping into a broader path. Small cues like these helped them navigate the darkness with surprising accuracy. Inside homes, people settled into evening routines shaped entirely by the dark. Cooking was usually finished before sunset, especially during colder months when the sun disappeared early. Families gathered around small sources of warmth, speaking softly, mending clothes, preparing tools for the next day, or simply resting. The absence of bright light encouraged calmness. Words didn't need to be loud, movements didn't need to be quick, and tasks didn't need to be rushed. People's eyes adjusted naturally to the low light. After spending hours in the dark, even the faintest glow, a sliver of moonlight across the floor, the reflection of stars on metal, or the dim ember in a fireplace, became surprisingly visible. Their senses sharpened in quiet ways. They listened more carefully, noticing the distant steps of a traveler approaching or the soft rustle of wind passing through thatched roofs. These subtle sounds helped them understand the world around them when their eyes couldn't do the work alone. The moon itself played an important role in guiding people through the night. A full moon could transform the entire landscape. Roads that were nearly invisible on a moonless night suddenly appeared like pale ribbons stretching across fields. Trees cast clear, soft shadows. Roofs glowed faintly. Paths became walkable without any artificial light at all. Communities often planned evening activities around these moonlit nights. Markets stayed open a bit longer, travelers extended their journeys, and neighbors visited one another with greater ease. On nights with less moonlight, the stars became the quiet companions of travelers. People recognized familiar patterns in the sky, using them not for dramatic navigation across oceans as sailors once did, but simply to maintain a sense of direction during peaceful, short walks. A particular star rising above a hill might indicate the road to a nearby settlement. Another cluster might sit directly above a barn or a stream. Without consciously thinking about it, people developed a gentle awareness of the night sky and how it related to the world beneath it. For those who needed to travel farther during the night, the journey became a slow, thoughtful process. Roads were often uneven, winding, or bordered by thick vegetation. Travelers relied heavily on memory, step by step recalling familiar curves, bridges, or landmarks. A large rock by the path, a distinctive bend in a tree, the sound of running water. These served as the guideposts of night travel. Some towns created simple markers along their roads. Wooden posts, stone boundaries, or carved symbols helped travelers orient themselves. Even though these markers were barely visible in the dark, people could find them by touch. Running a hand along a rough wooden post, feeling the smooth surface of a well-worn stone, or locating the edge of a fence provided enough information to continue the journey with confidence. In many places, inns and resting houses spaced along major roads offered safe points for evening travelers. Their windows glowed gently with warm light, often visible from a considerable distance. For someone walking in darkness, spotting that glow was a reassurance that they were still on the right path. The light was never bright, but in a world of deep darkness, even a small window shining quietly felt like a beacon. Inside these inns, travelers often shared stories, not dramatic tales of danger, but simple observations of the road, the weather, or the quiet stillness of the night. Conversations drifted softly, accompanied by the sound of gentle footsteps or the low crackle of fire. These shared experiences helped people feel connected, forming communities among strangers who met only briefly. As nights grew colder or longer in certain seasons, households prepared ahead of time. They stored extra candles, placed firewood within easy reach, and made sure everything they needed was organized before the sun disappeared. Planning was essential because once darkness settled in, searching for misplaced items became difficult. This careful preparation added a rhythm to daily life, with each task syncing naturally to the movement of the sun. What's striking about these earlier centuries is not the inconvenience of the darkness, but how gracefully people adapted to it. They did not rush to change the night. They shaped their behaviors around it. Evening became a peaceful time rather than an obstacle. Today, we might view such darkness as limiting, but for them, it offered a moment of rest, reflection, and gentle slowing. In some places, communities developed small traditions around nightfall. Some families stepped outside to observe the fading sky, appreciating the transition from day to evening. Others used the quiet hours to share stories, teach useful skills, or simply reflect. Without bright distractions, attention turned naturally toward conversation, memories, and the soft sounds of their surroundings. The darkness also encouraged neighborliness. Because homes were close and night movement required cooperation, people helped one another when needed. If someone had to walk to another house during late hours, a neighbor might accompany them, carrying a small light. These small acts created trust within the community and made night travel feel calm and safe. Even household animals, such as horses or dogs, developed their own sense of routine at night. They understood that evenings were quieter. They rested, listened, and moved slowly, mirroring the behaviors of the people around them. The entire environment fell into a shared rhythm shaped by the absence of artificial light. In this first step into the story of Nights Before Street Lamps, we see a world not hindered by darkness, but guided by it. People lived in harmony with natural light. They adapted, memorized, listened, and moved thoughtfully. Their evenings were not filled with activity, but with calmness. The night was a time of rest, not a continuation of the busy day. And as we continue into the next chapters, we will explore even more of these gentle details: how tools evolved, how travelers prepared themselves, how communities found clever ways to bring light where it was needed, and how the slow transition from darkness to the earliest street lighting began reshaping the rhythm of life itself. For now, we leave this first chapter with the quiet image of a small village resting under a sky of soft stars, its paths guided not by bright lamps, but by memory moonlight and the peaceful patience of those who lived long before the modern glow. Long before the arrival of street lamps, before towns glimmered under rows of orderly light, evenings belonged to a softer world, one shaped by the gentle glow of simple lights people created with their own hands. These small lights did not chase away the darkness, nor were they meant to. Instead, they softened it, creating just enough brightness to continue a task, walk a short path, or share a quiet moment indoors. To understand how people navigated nights in earlier centuries, it helps to begin with the humble, everyday objects that illuminated their world: candles, small oil lamps, and lanterns, tools that offered guidance not by overpowering the night, but by coexisting peacefully with it. Imagine a cottage at the edge of a village, its interior slowly dimming as the last lines of sunset fade behind distant hills. The room is warm, shaped by the scent of wood and earth, and gradually the family who lives there prepares to transition from day to evening. A single candle is lit, its flame blooming into a soft, wavering glow that fills only a small corner of the room. It doesn't brighten the space fully, but it gives the eyes something to adjust to, a small radius of warmth that pushes back just enough darkness to continue gentle tasks. People gathered around such candles with care. They understood how precious each one was, and how slowly it needed to be used to last through many evenings. Candles were crafted in different ways depending on the region. Some villages made large batches at specific times of the year, melting materials and carefully shaping them using molds or dip techniques. Other households made smaller quantities whenever needed. In some places, candle making was a trade of its own, passed through families who had perfected efficient methods over generations. Regardless of where they came from, candles were valuable items, often stored in special places inside the home to keep them dry and safe. Lighting one was a conscious decision, never done casually. Each flame was treated with respect because it was both delicate and essential. Yet candles alone weren't the only flickering companions of the night. Oil lamps were just as common, especially in areas where appropriate oils were easier to produce or acquire. These lamps were simple in design, small containers carved from clay, shaped from metal, or sometimes crafted from stone. A wick made from plant fibers or textile scraps was placed inside, absorbing the oil and bringing it outward to meet the flame. When lit, an oil lamp produced a steady, warm glow that lasted longer than many candles and required little maintenance during use. People placed these lamps on tables while they repaired tools, wrote notes, sorted grains, or shared stories before rest. Inside homes, light was intentionally limited. People didn't try to brighten entire rooms. Instead, they illuminated only the area they needed at that moment. A single lamp might shine on a workbench, while the rest of the room remained peacefully dim. Shadows stretched softly across wooden walls, moving gently with even the slightest breeze. The light felt calm, warm, and forgiving, nothing harsh, nothing rushed. It encouraged slower movements, quieter conversations, and a natural winding down of the day. When stepping outside, people often needed something more protected than an open flame. That is where lanterns came into daily life. Lanterns were designed to shield fragile lights from wind or sudden movements. A candle or small oil lamp placed inside a framed enclosure could be carried safely through paths and roads. Early lanterns were simple, wooden frames, metal rings, or thin sheets working together to create a box that held light inside while allowing it to shine outward. As someone walked with a lantern, the flame would sway gently, casting dancing glows on the ground. This small circle of illumination was just enough to see a few steps ahead. People never expected to brighten the entire night. Such an idea would have felt unnecessary. They simply needed guidance for their next few actions. Lanterns were kept by doorways, ready to be grabbed whenever someone needed to move outside after sunset. It wasn't unusual to see a lantern glow drifting slowly along a village path in the evening, a quiet reminder that someone was returning home, visiting a neighbor, or completing a small task before sleep. The sight of a lantern in motion was gentle and comforting, connecting the community even in darkness. Inside inns or communal houses, lanterns and oil lamps shaped the atmosphere of evening gatherings. Travelers arriving late would spot the warm glow from far away, its light barely cutting through the night, yet giving them reassurance that they were approaching a place to rest. Upon entering, they would find the shared room lit by several small flames, each contributing a modest brightness that together created a warm, welcoming environment. Such places were not loud or bustling in the evenings. Travelers ate simple meals, exchanged quiet stories, and enjoyed the sense of safety provided by the gathering of small lights. These small sources of illumination didn't just help people see, they also shaped their perception of time. Without bright, constant lighting, evenings had a natural rhythm. As candles burned down or lamps grew dim, people understood that sleep was near. The fading of artificial light mirrored the fading of energy after a day's work. Families wound down together, finishing tasks slowly and intentionally. When the final flame was extinguished, the transition into night felt smooth and peaceful, not abrupt. People also developed small habits to maintain light efficiently. Some trimmed wicks carefully to prevent smoke and make flames last longer. Others cleaned lamp containers regularly to help the flame burn steadily. Lantern glass was wiped clean whenever possible, ensuring the glow could pass through clearly. Even small gestures, like shielding a lamp with one's hand while opening a door, were instinctive. Generations of experience taught people how to protect these delicate flames, and those skills became part of daily routines. Travelers, especially those who needed to move farther from towns, often carried simple lighting tools with them. A lantern, extra oil, or spare candles could make the difference between a confident walk and a difficult one. But many travelers still relied more on memory than on brightness. The roads they walked were familiar, shaped by landmarks they knew well. Stones, tree shapes, slight bends in the path. All these details helped guide them just as reliably as the light they carried. Even with these lights, darkness still dominated most of the landscape. The goal was never to erase the night. Instead, artificial light existed as a small companion, helpful, comforting, but always limited intentionally. The night sky remained visible, stars clear and bright, and the moon continued to play an important role in evening activities. On nights with strong moonlight, many didn't need lamps at all. The moon cast a cool, soft glow across roads, rooftops, and fields, making movement easier. People planned tasks around such nights, sometimes working slightly later or traveling slightly longer when moonlight was abundant. But on moonless nights, small flames mattered even more. The contrast between complete natural darkness and the faint glow of a single candle made that little light feel almost magical. A lantern hanging outside a home became a guiding point for someone returning late. A moving flame seen in the distance told neighbors someone was awake. Quiet connections formed between people simply through the presence of light moving through darkness. As time passed, these small sources of illumination slowly improved. Materials became slightly more efficient, designs grew more practical, and communities refined their methods for making, storing, and preserving light. Yet, even with these improvements, the overall atmosphere of nighttime remained gentle, dim, and peaceful. Light was something to be used with intention, not something meant to flood the world. Looking back now, it's not the lack of brightness that feels striking. It's the harmony between darkness and the small, warm glows that people carried with them. Nights before street lamps were not filled with fear or inconvenience, but with calmness and adaptation. People lived comfortably within the rhythms of natural light, and the gentle glow of their simple tools shaped their evenings with quiet beauty. This soft balance between darkness and personal light was the foundation of nighttime life for centuries. In the next chapter, we will explore how people approached longer journeys at night, how they prepared for them, what tools they carried, and how communities supported travelers moving through quiet roads between sunset and sunrise. Traveling at night in centuries before street lamps was an experience shaped entirely by patience, memory, and the quiet companionship of darkness. People didn't rush along roads the way we do today. They didn't expect clarity, and they certainly didn't imagine the possibility of lighting an entire path. Instead, the night was something to move through slowly, gently, and thoughtfully. Every journey taken after sunset required preparation. Not dramatic preparation, but small, practical habits that communities developed over generations. These habits allowed people to walk through dim landscapes with surprising confidence, guided more by what they knew than by what they could see. Imagine a traveler standing at the edge of a village just after sunset. The sky still holds a faint band of fading light, but the world is already shifting into deeper shades of blue. In the distance, the outline of a road begins to blur into darkness. The traveler adjusts a simple cloak, checks a lantern to make sure the flame is steady, and begins to walk. The sound of footsteps on dirt becomes more pronounced in the quiet. A faint breeze carries the gentle scent of soil and faraway fields. Nothing about the scene is hurried. The traveler knows that walking at night is not about speed, but about rhythm. Most roads in earlier centuries were unpaved, shaped naturally by repeated footsteps, wagon wheels, and horses. Paths curved around hills, followed rivers, or cut straight through open countryside. Villagers walked these paths hundreds, even thousands of times in their lives. As a result, they didn't rely solely on sight to guide them. Long before visual landmarks disappeared into darkness, people learned to navigate with memory, where the ground dipped slightly, where stones gathered underfoot, where a distinctive tree leaned subtly over the path. This memory-based navigation became a quiet skill that everyone developed naturally. Children learned it by following parents on early evening walks. Farmers practiced it by moving between fields and homes during late seasons. Craftsmen returning from markets relied on it when daylight faded sooner than expected. Over time, the night became less an obstacle and more a familiar companion. But even the most familiar road required some preparation. Travelers rarely set out at night suddenly. They planned carefully, gathering small items that would make their journey smoother. A lantern with a fresh candle or oil was the most essential tool. Some carried simple walking sticks to sense the ground ahead. Others tied small cloth bundles containing food, spare wicks, or tiny flasks of oil. These weren't elaborate supplies, just modest, practical items shaped by experience. Before leaving, travelers often visited neighbors to mention their upcoming journey. This wasn't a formal announcement. It was a simple courtesy rooted in community life. People understood that night travel was slow and could stretch longer than expected. Knowing someone's route helped villagers stay aware, ready to offer assistance if needed. Community awareness was an invisible safety net woven through centuries of shared routines. Once on the road, travelers settled into a gentle pace. Darkness naturally slowed them. Even with a lantern, the light reached only a few steps ahead, moving softly with each motion of the hand. This created a slow, constant rhythm of walking, scanning, listening, and adjusting. The road unfolded one small circle of light at a time. Instead of focusing on distant points, a traveler focused on the next few footsteps. The night amplified sound in quiet, subtle ways. In the absence of modern noise, the soft crunch of gravel became a guide. The faint rustle of leaves suggested how close the roadside trees were. The distant trickle of a stream helped travelers confirm they hadn't drifted off the main path. People became skilled listeners. Sound filled in the gaps left by darkness, creating an acoustic map of the world around them. Even animals moving in the distance didn't alarm travelers. They were simply part of the night's natural rhythm. The occasional hoot of a bird or the rustling of a small creature in the undergrowth was accepted without fear. People recognized these sounds, understood them, and became comfortable with them. When the moon rose, the night changed entirely. A full moon could brighten entire landscapes. It cast wide, silvered light across the road, allowing travelers to extinguish their lanterns and rely solely on nature's glow. Moonlit nights were often preferred for journeys that required covering greater distances. The road appeared pale and visible, fields stretched out softly around travelers, and far-off buildings or trees took on gentle outlines that made navigation easier. Many communities timed essential travel around moon cycles, planning tasks that required evening movement on nights when natural light was strongest. But even on nights when the moon was hidden or slim, the sky still provided quiet direction. Stars helped travelers orient themselves, not in the precise way professional navigators did, but as simple reference points. People became familiar with the direction certain stars rose or the general arc of the night sky. Without needing to name constellations, they recognized patterns that helped them maintain direction. Some roads included small markers placed by communities for guidance. A line of stones near a curve, a wooden post marking the start of a long slope, or a carved symbol at a crossroads served as tactile guides. Travelers found these markers through touch when sight was limited. A hand brushed against a familiar shape, and it reassured them that they were still following the correct route. Such markers were not elaborate or ceremonial. They were practical, helpful, and crafted for everyday use. Shorter night journeys were more common than long ones. People walked from one home to another, from a workshop to a nearby dwelling, from fields back to the village. These distances were familiar, and people navigated them with little concern. It was the longer routes between towns that required greater focus. Travelers on such roads often moved in small groups. Companionship made the walk calmer and more efficient. When 2 or 3 lanterns were carried together, their light combined softly, illuminating a slightly wider area without overwhelming the night. Inns located along major routes played a key role in night travel. These establishments were modest, usually featuring a main room with tables, a hearth that dimmed into glowing embers by evening, and a few private chambers upstairs. Lanterns hung outside entrances, turning into quiet beacons visible from the road. The glow from an inn was rarely bright, but in the surrounding darkness, even a faint shimmer of light signaled safety and rest. Travelers entering an inn late at night were greeted with simple warmth. A worker might relight a small lamp, guide guests to a table, or bring warm water for refreshment. Conversations remained soft at such hours, blending into the quiet of the night. People didn't talk loudly or move quickly. They respected the peacefulness of the evening. After settling, they carried a candle upstairs or to a resting area, and its glow became part of the inn's nightly rhythm. Travelers also depended heavily on memory for planning night journeys. They remembered the kinds of trees along certain paths, the bends and streams, the smells of soil in particular regions, the feel of wind patterns between valleys. These sensory details allowed people to navigate without relying solely on sight. The night, instead of being a barrier, became a backdrop through which they moved confidently by drawing on experience accumulated over years. In many regions, neighbors helped travelers through darker or more complex sections of paths. If someone needed to visit a distant farm, another person might walk with them halfway. When returning late from gatherings, people often traveled in pairs or small clusters. Sharing a lantern or simply walking side by side made the journey comforting. Children, too, learned the art of night navigation early. They followed adults carrying lanterns, observing how the flame moved, how steps were placed, how obstacles were identified by sound and memory. Over time, these small experiences built a generational understanding. The night was not to be feared. It was to be respected and navigated with calm awareness. Longer journeys required even more preparation. Travelers stored extra oil in small flasks wrapped with cloth to prevent spills. Some carried spare wicks or strings to replace ones that burned out. Others crafted protective covers for lantern openings to prevent sudden gusts of wind from extinguishing the flame. Every detail mattered because relighting a lantern in deep darkness was both difficult and time-consuming. Despite the care taken with these small lights, nature remained the true companion of the night traveler. The scent of fresh grass, the feel of humidity rising from fields, the distant outline of hills, all these subtle cues created a mental map that guided people without overwhelming them. Travel at night became an act of listening, sensing, and remembering rather than depending solely on sight. Even roads connecting major towns had their own nighttime behaviors. Market workers returning late, messengers carrying simple notes, or helpers moving between households followed these paths regularly. Over generations, communities developed shared knowledge about which sections were easiest to navigate, where the ground felt smoother, and which landmarks stood out even in dim lighting. Such travel rarely involved hurry. No one expected to move fast. People adapted their pace to the darkness, allowing the night to shape their steps. The gentle pace, the rhythmic sound of footfalls, and the occasional flicker of lanterns created a peaceful atmosphere that modern travel rarely offers. When travelers reached their destination, the sight of a small light in a window or a lantern hanging on a door brought immediate comfort. That faint glow signaled the presence of people, warmth, and rest. It symbolized the end of the journey and the beginning of quiet time indoors. Looking back, night travel in earlier centuries was less about overcoming darkness and more about cooperating with it. People respected the night's limits, moved within its rhythms, and carried small, practical lights that worked alongside the natural world rather than against it. They didn't seek brightness, they sought balance. The night was not a challenge, it was a patient companion, guiding those who understood its quiet language. In the next chapter, we will drift even deeper into the ways communities adapted their homes, villages, and routines to the natural rhythm of darkness, exploring how architecture, layout, and daily habits shaped nighttime life long before modern lighting. Nighttime in earlier centuries was not something people fought against. Instead, it was a natural element of life, predictable, calm, and woven deeply into the way communities shaped their homes, streets, and routines. Villages, towns, and even large cities developed slowly around a rhythm that balanced daylight with deep evening quiet. Darkness influenced how buildings were arranged, how people moved between them, how communities interacted, and how the structure of daily life took shape. To understand the world before street lamps is to understand how deeply architecture, layout, and community habits were formed around the peaceful presence of night. Imagine approaching a village just as sunset gives way to dusk. There is no line of lamps illuminating the path toward the center, no glowing windows stretching down long streets. Instead, the village seems to blend into the fading light, becoming a collection of soft silhouettes. Roofs slope gently toward the sky. Chimneys release the last traces of warmth from evening fires. Houses sit close to one another, forming clusters shaped as much by social connection as by practical need. The air is still, carrying quiet echoes of distant footsteps and soft murmurs from doorways. In many places, villages were intentionally compact. Homes bordered one another closely, especially near central squares or meeting spots. This layout was not only convenient during the day, but also essential at night. When darkness settled, the short distance between homes allowed people to move easily from one place to another without needing bright guidance. Familiarity with every turn and path meant even minimal light, from a lantern, a window candle, or faint moonlight, was enough to navigate safely. Narrow streets added to this comfort. These pathways were shaped gradually by footsteps, wagons, and shared use. They curved naturally around buildings, rising and falling gently with the land. During the day, these narrow ways limited strong sunlight, offering shade. At night, they held warmth, muffled sound, and created cozy enclosures that made movement feel secure. When one person walked through such a street carrying a small lantern, the glow reflected softly off nearby walls, extending the light 3 or 4 times farther than it would have reached in an open field. Architecture, in this way, amplified the usefulness of very small lights. Houses themselves played a role in making nightlife manageable. Windows were generally small, not to keep light out, but because glass was precious and expensive. These tiny openings functioned like gentle funnels, letting firelight spill out into the night. A single candle inside a home might project a soft, welcoming glow visible to neighbors. And because houses were built close together, these tiny points of light created a subtle sense of connection. A traveler or villager walking home late could notice a faint shining square in the distance and feel reassured they were not alone. Communities often organized themselves around a central space. Whether it was a square, a courtyard, or a communal gathering area, This space served as a meeting point for daily activities. In the evenings, the same space took on a quieter purpose. People heading home from finishing their work or completing a late task crossed through these areas, sometimes passing neighbors who stood outside to enjoy the cool air. Conversations flowed in soft tones. Children playing outside were gently guided home. The entire village seemed to settle into a shared rhythm, one that moved in harmony with the natural dimming of the sky. The streets themselves were not equipped with lighting, yet their design made them intuitive even without bright guidance. Many followed the contours of the land, curving with hills or bending around clusters of homes. People memorized these curves through years of daily movement. It was almost impossible to become lost within one's own village, even in deep darkness. Every turn felt familiar. Every path carried subtle cues. A certain sound when wind passed between two houses, the scent of herbs growing near a doorway, the shape of a distinctive tree leaning over a corner. Homes often featured small exterior elements that acted as natural guides. A stone placed near a doorstep, a carved wooden post, or a distinctive pattern in a walkway helped people orient themselves after sunset. These markers were not created specifically for navigation. They were simply part of daily construction and decoration. Yet they became essential parts of nighttime movement, allowing villagers to walk quietly and confidently without relying on bright light. Community life was centered around cooperation, and this extended naturally into evening routines. If a person needed to move through darker parts of the village, neighbors often helped. A lantern shared between two households illuminated enough of a path for both to navigate. Sometimes, a family would keep a small candle burning in a window facing the street, acting as a reference point for anyone returning late. These acts were simple and unspoken, yet they played a significant role in making night movement calm and comfortable. Even farms or outlying houses, though more distant, were designed with awareness of nighttime needs. Paths connecting them to the village were kept clear of large obstacles. Fences and boundaries were arranged so that even in deep darkness, a person walking along them could guide themselves by touch. Barns, sheds, and storage buildings were placed in predictable patterns near one another, minimizing confusion when moving between them. Those who lived slightly outside the central cluster of homes carried knowledge of the land as part of their daily life, making night navigation a matter of habit rather than challenge. Communities also understood how sound moved through their surroundings. At night, when the world was quiet, even small noises traveled farther. The creak of a door, the gentle communication between neighboring families, the distant clatter of a tool being stored. These sounds acted as subtle indicators of location. People recognized the voices of neighbors, the footsteps of family members, or the usual routine noises around their own homes. Darkness sharpened these perceptions, turning hearing into a natural guide. Inside homes, the way rooms were arranged reflected nighttime needs as well. Frequently used items were kept close to resting areas so that no one needed to search in darkness. Walkways between beds, hearths, and doors were kept clear. People moved with familiarity, tracing routes they had followed countless times. A simple ember glowing in a fireplace often provided enough light to distinguish shapes and avoid obstacles. Families rarely rearranged major furniture unless necessary, ensuring that nightly paths remained predictable. Even multi-story houses were designed with nighttime in mind. Staircases were usually narrow and positioned along walls. Their steps were often slightly worn or patterned, allowing people to feel their way comfortably. Railings, when present, were smooth and sturdy. People walked these stairs by memory, sometimes carrying a candle shielded with a hand to prevent drafts from extinguishing the flame. Courtyards and gardens, though dim at night, were planned thoughtfully. Pathways were lined with stones or bordered by plants recognizable through touch or scent. Storage areas or tool sheds were placed in logical, accessible spots. Moving through these outdoor spaces required little artificial light because their layout remained constant season after season. In many villages, certain communal locations quietly became nighttime orientation points. A large tree standing at a crossroads, a well at the center of a square, or a tall structure like a mill or tower helped people maintain direction even in low visibility. These landmarks often became part of local identity. People spoke about them as naturally as one might describe a familiar neighbor. And at night, Even when barely visible, their silhouettes provided reassurance. Travelers passing through unfamiliar villages often relied on local guidance. Residents willingly explained the layout, pointing out main paths, prominent landmarks, and the safest routes for moving through dim streets. Hospitality extended into the evening, with villagers occasionally escorting travelers partway through unfamiliar areas. In this way, the nighttime environment encouraged cooperation and trust. The absence of bright lighting also influenced the pace of evening life. Villagers rarely stayed outdoors for long after sunset unless necessary. The natural dimming encouraged earlier rest and a slower, quieter end to the day. Indoor tasks became gentle and simple, tidying, preparing for tomorrow, sharing calm conversations. People accepted this rhythm as part of life, and their homes and communities were shaped to support it. Even markets and social spaces adapted to this routine. Evening gatherings happened in well-known areas where neighbors could meet easily without needing bright illumination. Small fires or lanterns placed near central areas offered modest light for conversations or brief exchanges. But these gatherings never aimed to imitate daylight activity. They were short, thoughtful, and centered around social connection rather than productivity. Over generations, the harmony between village design and natural night created a world where darkness felt normal, almost welcoming. People did not see it as something to conquer. Instead, they built their environments to coexist with it, through placement of homes, shaping of paths, thoughtful arrangement of objects, and shared community habits. Everything about a village's structure made nighttime navigation calm and intuitive. Street lamps would one day change all of this, altering how villages grew, how people interacted after sunset, and how communities shaped their routines. But before their arrival, villages were places where architecture and darkness worked together quietly, creating a peaceful nighttime world that felt familiar and deeply connected. In the next chapter, we'll explore how early experiments in lighting slowly began to reshape the evening landscape, how the first efforts to illuminate roads and squares created new habits, new challenges, and a gradual shift in the relationship between people and night. For countless generations, nightfall meant a natural slowing of life. Villages quieted, roads emptied, and homes became small islands of warmth surrounded by gentle darkness. People accepted this rhythm without question. Yet as communities grew larger and busier, a quiet need began to form. A desire to extend certain activities just a little longer, to make shared spaces slightly more accessible after sunset, and to create small points of guidance for those who needed to move between homes, markets, and workshops during late hours. This desire did not emerge suddenly. It grew slowly, shaped by changing routines, expanding towns, and the natural curiosity of people wondering whether the night could be softened just a little more. The earliest attempts at public light were simple, modest, and far from what we would recognize as street lighting today. They were not organized systems, nor were they designed to brighten entire roads. They were small solutions created by communities to gently support evening activity without disturbing the natural calm of the night. Imagine an early town square during an evening several centuries ago. A few stalls remain open from the day's market. Workers are finishing tasks, stacking crates, or brushing dust from wooden counters. As daylight fades, the last glow of the sky turns the square into a soft silhouette. People who linger begin placing small sources of light, perhaps a candle in a protected holder or an oil lamp hung from a wooden beam. These tiny flames aren't meant to light the whole square. They simply help a few tasks continue gently until they are naturally finished. These small lights often became the first signs of shared illumination. One lamp near a stall led to another by a workshop door. A family living beside the square hung a lantern above their entrance, not to brighten the street, but to welcome those who passed by. Over time, these lights formed a quiet pattern. They weren't coordinated, but they subtly shaped the atmosphere of the community on certain evenings. The square didn't glow brightly. It pulsed soft points of light, scattered depending on who happened to be working or walking at that hour. As towns continued to grow, certain central areas became hubs of activity that stretched a little bit later into the evening. Bakers working long hours might keep a lamp glowing above their shop so that early customers or late passers-by could identify the place. Workshops where longer tasks were common, such as carpentry or milling, sometimes hung lanterns outside to help workers move between tools and storage. These lanterns were not public services, they were practical additions made for daily tasks. But the effect was the same, pockets of gentle light appearing in places where people gathered most. People appreciated these small lights not for brightness, but for familiarity. A lantern above a door became a quiet symbol of evening life. It reassured those passing by that others were awake, finishing their day at a similar rhythm. In many towns, these modest lights subtly connected people, creating a shared understanding of evening movement. With time, communities began to realize that coordinated lighting, even in the smallest form, could make a significant difference. The idea began informally. A town elder, seeing the usefulness of a lantern placed near a main path, might suggest keeping one lit on certain nights. A market leader, noticing that visitors arrived slightly after sunset, might encourage vendors to place small lights at their stalls. These suggestions were practical rather than ambitious. Villagers weren't trying to transform night into day. They simply wanted to make specific tasks a little easier. In some towns, people selected certain key locations where shared light could be beneficial. A lantern might be placed near a well, since people often fetched water in early evenings. Another might hang near a meeting hall, guiding members as they gathered for discussions or community decisions. A third might mark the entrance to a frequently used road, helping travelers identify the correct path in dim light. These lanterns were basic. They required maintenance, oil refills, wick trimming, and careful protection from wind and rain. Community members took turns tending them, usually without formal roles or schedules. It was more an act of shared responsibility than an organized system. If someone passed by and noticed a lantern dimming, they simply added oil or relit it. This small cooperation strengthened community bonds and created a gentle rhythm to the nighttime routine. And yet, even with these early forms of public light, much of each town remained in natural darkness. These lanterns did not illuminate wide areas or transform the landscape. They provided narrow circles of glow, just enough to guide a step or identify a landmark. People continued navigating mostly through memory, sound, and the faint shimmer of moonlight. The early lights were simply small helpers, not replacements for the night. Markets were among the first places to see more consistent evening lighting. As towns grew, market days often extended longer than planned. Sellers stayed behind to pack goods or finish transactions, and buyers sometimes arrived late. To support these gradual changes, merchants placed lamps near their stalls. Some used lanterns hung from hooks, while others placed oil lamps on crates or tables. The resulting effect was a patchwork of warm light, each glow marking a stall or workspace. These lights allowed people to exchange goods, count coins, and inspect items without rushing against fading daylight. Workshops also played a role in shaping evening illumination. Certain trades required long hours, especially during urgent seasons. A carpenter working on an important piece late into the evening might place a lantern outside his shop. A cooper crafting barrels for an upcoming delivery might keep a small flame burning as he worked near the open door. These lights served no grand purpose. They were simply tools for practical work, but they naturally extended activity in surrounding areas. Communities soon noticed that these workplace lights helped more than just the workers. A lantern glowing near a shop or workshop illuminated a small portion of the street, making it easier for others to pass through. A few lanterns placed along a busy path created a soft line of guidance without formal planning. The boundary between private and public light slowly blurred. People began to expect certain areas to remain gently lit as part of daily life. Eventually, the idea of designated public lanterns became more widely accepted. Town elders, councils, or community groups discussed placing small lights at specific points. These discussions were not debates about progress or technology. They were decisions about convenience. Should a lantern hang near the main gate? Should another be placed at the meeting square? Should the path leading toward the fields have a light during certain seasons? The answers varied from town to town. Some communities adopted several shared lanterns. Others relied on spontaneous contributions. A few placed lanterns only during special events or gatherings. But across many regions, a quiet shift had begun. People were starting to see how gentle, purposeful lighting could support evening life without disrupting the peaceful nature of the night. These early lights were often set on tall wooden posts or hung from crossbeams. Some towns carved simple fixtures into stone walls. Others used hooks built directly into wooden buildings. The lanterns were small enough that wind could still challenge them, so villagers often crafted protective coverings or wind shields. Even so, lanterns occasionally dimmed or went out, requiring someone to relight them. This was simply part of their character. Public lights also carried a symbolic meaning. They represented care for the community, small acts of support that improved life for everyone. A lantern kept lit near a well meant someone had thought ahead so another person could fill a bucket safely. A lantern near a square meant neighbors wanted gatherings to remain comfortable. These gestures were quiet but deeply appreciated. As time passed, regions began experimenting with better materials. Oils burned more steadily, candles lasted longer, and lantern designs improved. But even with these advancements, the early public lights never aimed to dominate the night. Their glow remained modest by nature, flickering gently, casting soft shadows, illuminating only those who chose to walk near them. These first flickers of public light marked the beginning of a long transformation. They changed how people moved, how communities gathered, and how evening life slowly expanded beyond strict daylight boundaries. This shift was gradual, spanning generations, influenced by countless small decisions. No single moment marked the arrival of public lighting. It emerged naturally, shaped by need, habit, and the quiet cooperation of neighbors who recognized the value of a gentle glow in the darkness. As the idea grew, towns and cities began exploring more structured ways of illuminating shared spaces, eventually leading to more organized lighting methods that set the stage for the earliest true street lamps. But before that evolution took place, these simple lanterns, tended by hand, glowing softly in the night, formed the foundation for everything that would follow. In the next chapter, we'll explore how these humble beginnings inspired the first planned systems of evening illumination, examining how towns transitioned from scattered lanterns to coordinated lighting and how these early experiments changed the nightly rhythm of community life. Before the world ever saw rows of formal street lamps, before cities shimmered with coordinated lines of evening glow, communities began experimenting with the idea of structured nighttime lighting in small, deliberate steps. These early systems were not grand inventions. They were practical adjustments shaped by growing towns, busier routines, and a shared desire to make nighttime movement gentler and more predictable. What began as scattered lanterns placed by individuals slowly transformed into organized efforts that brought new order to evening life. Even though these attempts still relied on simple flames, their impact marked a quiet turning point in how people interacted with darkness. Imagine a mid-sized town in the early centuries of growth. By day, it bustles with activity. Merchants bargaining in the square, tradespeople crafting goods, carts rolling along main roads. But when evening arrives, the entire town softens into darkness. A few lanterns glow near workshops or along the busiest paths, but there is no consistent pattern. Travelers arriving late must depend mostly on moonlight, memory, or occasional points of glow scattered across the settlement. Conversations about improving evening movement begin spreading naturally, not out of urgency, but out of shared curiosity. People start asking simple questions. What if certain paths were always gently lit? What if lanterns didn't rely solely on the habits of individuals? Could the evening become a little easier without disturbing its peace? These questions did not appear suddenly. They surfaced gradually as towns grew larger and more interconnected. Families living at the edge of town walked farther to reach markets. Traders traveling from one town to another began arriving slightly earlier or later, depending on the season. Nighttime gatherings became more common during months when work required longer hours. The need was not for brightness, but for consistency, a reliable sense of direction, a quiet assurance that key points of the town could be found even when the sky had turned completely dark. The earliest form of organized night lighting often began with a single lantern placed deliberately by a group rather than an individual. In some towns, a centralized lantern was hung in the main square on evenings when gatherings were expected. This lantern wasn't brighter than any other, but it held symbolic weight. It was a shared light, a light that belonged to everyone. Its glow represented cooperation and became a natural meeting point after sunset. When villagers saw it lit, they knew others were nearby, finishing tasks or engaging in quiet conversation. From this idea, towns slowly adopted more structured methods. They chose a few high-traffic areas, important crossroads, the entrance to a central market, a path leading toward a well, and decided to maintain lights there more regularly. These lights were still simple lanterns, often suspended from wooden frames or tall posts. But now, instead of relying on whoever happened to pass by, people established quiet understandings. One household might refill the oil, another might check the wick, and someone else might make sure the flame was lit at dusk. These small agreements formed the earliest routines of public lighting maintenance. Such routines were never formal at first. There were no official positions or duties. Instead, responsibility circulated naturally through the community. When a lantern dimmed or went out, whoever noticed simply corrected it. These actions were driven by shared benefit, not obligation. Each person understood that a well-maintained light improved life for the entire town, even if only slightly. The effects of these early systems were quickly felt. Travelers entering town after sunset found their way more easily. Workers returning from nearby fields recognized familiar glows marking their routes. Market sellers packing up their goods appreciated the soft illumination that allowed them to finish calmly without rushing against darkness. Evening gatherings at community halls or meeting spaces felt more welcoming when a gentle light marked the entrance. Encouraged by this quiet success, some towns took the next step, designating a small group of people to oversee the lighting. These groups were not officials in any formal sense. They were volunteers, neighbors known for reliability, or craftspeople who worked with light as part of their trade. They took pride in storing spare oil, repairing lantern frames, or crafting better holders to protect flames from wind. They did not think of themselves as innovators. They simply saw a need and adapted to it. With this gentle organization, lanterns gradually appeared in more places. Near bridges, where footing could be tricky. Near steps leading into meeting halls. Along paths where workshops created late evening noise. These lanterns created subtle patterns of glow, forming the earliest outlines of lighting routes through towns. But even now, the lights remained modest. They cast narrow circles on the ground, enough for a person to place their next steps with confidence. They never attempted to brighten entire streets. As lanterns became more common, their designs evolved. Frames were made sturdier so they could withstand outdoor conditions. Glass panes became more widely used to protect flames without blocking light. Some towns developed small metal reflectors, polished to redirect glow outward more effectively. Others crafted lanterns with wider openings near the bottom to cast more illumination on the ground. These improvements didn't drastically change nighttime visibility, but they made the lights more reliable and more suited for shared use. One of the quietest yet most impactful developments came with the creation of fixed lantern posts. Instead of hanging lanterns from homes or temporary hooks, communities built dedicated posts along certain paths. These posts were simple, often wooden stakes driven into the ground or taller beams erected at intervals. At dusk, volunteers walked along the route, lighting each lantern in turn. The act of lighting them became a calm, predictable ritual. People often recognized the soft footsteps of the person making rounds, hearing the faint clink of metal or the gentle flicker of flames being tended. This ritual reinforced a sense of community. The sight of a person walking through the evening, lantern in hand, visiting one post after another, created a shared bond among residents. The lights seemed to knit the town together, providing subtle reassurance that someone had taken care to make the night easier for those who chose to move through it. Even with these early systems, darkness remained the dominant environment. The lanterns never aimed to alter that. They were designed to complement the night, not compete with it. Their role was to offer guidance without overwhelming the natural beauty of evening. People continued to rely on memory, sound, and intuition as much as light. The night remained quiet, calm, and deeply peaceful. As towns continued refining their lighting systems, they began to keep better track of where lights were most useful. Some lanterns were moved slightly to improve their reach. Others were removed from less traveled areas. Experiments happened naturally, adding a lantern here, repositioning one there, testing how far lights spread along narrow streets or between closely built houses. These adjustments shaped the earliest coordinated lighting routes long before formal planning ever existed. Even cities, which grew faster and more densely than rural towns, developed their own small-scale systems. Major gates or entrances often had lanterns hung on either side. Busy market centers sometimes kept 2 or 3 shared lights burning until late evening. Certain neighborhoods organized themselves to maintain lights near communal wells or courtyards. These early systems helped newcomers navigate unfamiliar districts, made trade and work more flexible, and generally encouraged a more relaxed evening rhythm. One of the most subtle but powerful effects of organized night lighting was the change in people's comfort levels. When lanterns appeared consistently in certain areas, people began moving more confidently through those spaces after sunset. They gathered slightly longer for conversations. They visited neighbors a bit more freely. Children returning home from late tasks felt safer walking familiar routes marked by softly glowing posts. Evening life extended just enough to create smoother transitions between day and night without disrupting the natural calming effect of darkness. Over time, these early organized systems laid the foundation for something much larger. They demonstrated that communities could work together to create shared illumination. They showed that small lights placed strategically could improve daily life without overwhelming the night. They proved that lighting did not need to be bright or intrusive to be effective. And perhaps most importantly, they sparked the idea that night itself could be gently shaped, not conquered, but softened through thoughtful planning. These early lanterns, tended by hand and carried through dim streets, represented the first steps toward the structured lighting that would emerge in the centuries ahead. The transformation remained slow, deliberate, and deeply connected to the needs of everyday life. No one imagined they were beginning a journey toward modern street lamps. They were simply caring for their communities, one quiet flame at a time. In the next chapter, we will explore how these modest beginnings gradually led to more advanced systems of lighting. How new materials, new ideas, and growing cities encouraged stronger, more organized illumination that further reshaped the relationship between people and the night. As communities grew more confident in their simple lighting systems, a slow shift began in how people imagined the night. They didn't dream of filling streets with brightness or extending work endlessly into the late hours. Instead, they wondered whether evening could be shaped a bit more gently, whether certain paths could be easier to follow, whether public tasks could be completed more comfortably, and whether gatherings could last a little longer without straining eyes or relying solely on a few flickering lanterns. This shift did not arrive suddenly. It evolved through countless small decisions, subtle improvements, and the gradual blending of changing materials with growing community needs. To understand how brighter evenings first appeared, imagine a town on the edge of growth, neither small nor bustling, but caught somewhere in between. During the day, markets thrive, roads fill with carts, and workshops ring softly with the rhythm of skilled hands at work. At night, the town returns to its familiar quiet. Lanterns glow in scattered locations, marking certain paths with comforting presence. But as the population grows and tasks multiply, people begin noticing moments when the modest lanterns feel insufficient. Perhaps the market needs a small light earlier in the morning or later in the evening during seasonal busy periods. Perhaps travelers arriving from distant towns tend to reach the gates slightly after dusk. Perhaps village meetings held in cooler evening hours require clearer visibility for reading notes or sorting items. These observations are simple, but together they stir curiosity. Can evening tasks be made just a little easier? This curiosity sparks experiments, quiet, careful, community-driven attempts to introduce slightly brighter light into public spaces. At first, this brightness comes not from new inventions, but from improved versions of familiar tools. Candle makers explore different materials and crafting methods. Some candles burn longer without thickening smoke. Others produce a clearer flame. Lantern frames become sturdier, with better ventilation that reduces flicker. Oil lamps improve with more refined oils that burn more consistently. Each improvement seems small when viewed alone, but together they create meaningful progress. People begin noticing that a lantern placed near a workshop door illuminates the surrounding area more reliably. A slightly larger lamp near a marketplace makes counting coins or examining goods more comfortable. A pair of lanterns hung from opposite sides of a town gate form a more visible, welcoming point for evening travelers. None of these moments transform the night dramatically, yet they gradually reshape its texture. Communities refine these experiments with instinctive precision. A lantern mounted too high casts awkward shadows. Villagers move it lower. Another placed too close to a wall reflects poorly. They shift it outward. A lamp near a communal well dims quickly because of drafts. Someone designs a windshield. These adjustments are born not from engineering or grand planning, but from everyday trial and error, ordinary people evaluating what works best through observation and habit. As improvements accumulate, evening life slowly becomes more fluid. People remain outdoors a bit longer on warm nights. Small groups linger in squares, engaging in gentle conversation. Night markets, though rare, occasionally extend into early evening hours with modest lighting carefully placed around key areas. Workers repairing tools near open doorways find it easier to continue their tasks for a short time after sunset. Children participating in simple chores outside finish them more comfortably when surroundings are faintly illuminated. The night remains peaceful, but a subtle shift is undeniable. Evening activity becomes more flexible, less constrained by darkness, and more welcoming to those who need to move between places. During this period, certain communities experiment with larger shared lamps. Instead of a single candle or small oil flame, they try filling slightly larger containers with refined oils to produce broader illumination. These containers, often held within specially designed lanterns, create wider circles of glow, particularly useful in central gathering spaces. The increased brightness is still gentle, not enough to change the night dramatically, but it marks the beginning of more ambitious lighting attempts. The impact is immediate. Market sellers appreciate the improved light when sorting items or preparing goods for the next day. Travelers feel more assured when approaching town squares marked by larger lanterns. People walking from one part of town to another find it easier to recognize paths and landmarks. The glow of these shared lamps becomes a reliable presence, a soft guide signaling the heart of the community. As towns continue growing, this desire for improved evening lighting becomes more common. Conversations emerge in meeting halls. Should the brighter lamps be lit on certain nights of the week? Should additional lamps be placed near busy paths? Can a few more be installed before winter when daylight fades earlier? These discussions reflect not demands for progress, but practical responses to community habits. With each passing year, more people begin to learn how to maintain lamps. Oil storage becomes more organized. Wicks are prepared in advance. Lantern frames are cleaned to ensure clear light. A community that once relied on a handful of volunteers now sees participation from wider groups. Neighbors, craftspeople, travelers staying temporarily, even older children learning responsibility. In some places, the maintenance becomes part of evening tradition. A small group walks through town at dusk, lighting each lamp in a practice sequence. Their footsteps echo softly across stone streets, and the gentle flicker of fresh flames creates a warm trail behind them. These people are not officials or appointed workers. They're community members fulfilling a small but valued duty, carrying on an unspoken tradition passed quietly from one generation to another. As brighter lamps become more common, towns begin experimenting with the placement of light. Instead of scattered points glowing without coordination, communities start planning small lighting routes. Lamps are spaced along main walking paths, near important buildings, and around central squares. The spacing is thoughtful. Too close, and the lamps waste fuel. Too far, and their glow becomes less useful. Through shared effort, settlements find comfortable rhythms. When lanterns are placed at consistent intervals, people notice that movement becomes smoother. Paths feel more coherent, easier to follow, and less reliant solely on moonlight. Even on moonless nights, the faint gleam of lamp after lamp creates a quiet chain that gently guides travelers. Towns begin referring to these routes informally: the lit path, the bright way, or the lantern walk. These names reflect not brightness, but familiarity and reliability. With this newfound consistency, evening gatherings evolve. Social groups meet in squares lit by a handful of coordinated lamps. Community events scheduled near dusk continue without haste. People contribute stories, share news, and exchange goods in an environment that feels welcoming rather than rushed. The lamps create a sense of extended evening life, a calm, expanded space between day's end and the deep night. Even in private homes, the effects of brighter evenings are felt. People are able to perform simple tasks later, repairing tools, preparing tomorrow's meal, or completing small crafts. Children finish responsibilities with more confidence. Visitors stay slightly longer, knowing the walk home is easier thanks to improved glow along familiar paths. Still, the brighter evenings never overwhelm the natural ambience of night. Lamps continue to flicker softly, producing warm tones that complement the star-filled darkness rather than masking it. Towns remain quiet. People still retire earlier than modern habits would suggest. The night retains its calming influence, shaping rest, solitude, and reflection. This balance is an important part of the era's identity. People did not wish to eliminate the night. They simply sought cooperation with it. The brighter lamps were created not to dominate evening hours, but to assist with essential tasks, support community interactions, and gently extend the boundaries of comfortable movement. The shift was intentional, thoughtful, and gradual. As growing populations adopted these brighter lamps, a new understanding began forming. That shared light could enhance community safety, strengthen social bonds, and improve evening work patterns without sacrificing tranquility. This understanding laid the groundwork for broader transformations that would come much later, transformations that would eventually introduce the first systematic streetlit roads. But before those large-scale changes arrived, towns continued refining their peaceful, flickering systems of improved evening illumination, finding beauty and usefulness in the delicate balance between shadows and gentle glow. In the next chapter, we will explore how these brighter evenings influenced travel, work, and social time, how improved lighting slowly reshaped the very rhythm of the night, encouraging new habits while preserving the peaceful nature of darkness. As towns and villages grew more comfortable with their softly illuminated evenings, something subtle began to shift in the rhythm of daily life. People still respected darkness, still understood that night was a time of rest and quiet, but the gentle glow of improved lamps created new possibilities that had never existed before. Nothing changed suddenly. No one declared a new era. Yet day by day, year by year, the presence of small, consistent lights slowly reshaped the ways communities worked, traveled, socialized, and understood the spaces around them after sunset. To understand how this change unfolded, imagine a town that has recently placed brighter lamps along its central pathways. The lamps are not dazzling or overwhelming. They produce warm, steady glow, brighter than individual lanterns, but still soft enough to blend naturally into the night. At dusk, as the sky transitions from amber to deep blue, these lamps come to life, one by one, lighting the familiar curves of roads and highlighting the outlines of nearby buildings. The moment feels quiet and reassuring, like a gentle signal that the night is beginning, but people are still welcome outside a little longer. One of the first aspects of daily life influenced by brighter evenings was work. In earlier times, people rushed to finish tasks before daylight disappeared. Harvesting, crafting, measuring, repairing, everything needed to be completed while the sun was still up. But now, with coordinated lamps providing steady illumination in central areas, certain types of work naturally extended into early evening. A woodworker might spend an extra half hour smoothing a newly carved surface. A merchant might continue weighing goods for early morning customers. A tailor might bring a final garment to a neighbor under the glow of a nearby lamp. These moments were never about increasing productivity. They simply made the transition from day to night smoother and less pressured. For travelers, the change was even more pronounced. Walking into a well-lit route felt entirely different from approaching a town in complete darkness. The faint chain of lamps served as a quiet welcome. Instead of uncertainty, travelers felt familiarity. They recognized the patterns of lamps as they approached, a pair marking the gate, a line leading toward the market, and another set distinguishing the central square. These glowing points replaced the guesswork that once accompanied evening arrivals. Where previously someone might have walked slowly, pausing to confirm direction, now they followed the gentle rhythm of light guiding them comfortably forward. The change in evening atmosphere also influenced how people connected socially. Before brighter lamps, gatherings after sunset were mostly limited to homes or small groups just outside doorways. People rarely lingered in squares or courtyards once darkness settled, except during special events. But with consistent lamps marking central areas, neighbors began to remain outside a little longer. They stood in softly lit spaces discussing the day's events, shared small news, exchanged tools, or simply enjoyed the coolness of evening. A few children played simple games a little longer, staying within the glow of familiar lamps where parents could easily watch them. Of course, life still ended early by modern standards. People remained deeply connected to natural rhythms. But the presence of brighter lamps softened the boundaries between day and night, allowing a more tranquil and comfortable transition. Even routines related to daily chores adapted. Some families used the early evening to prepare items for the next day, sorting grains, washing tools, or tying bundles of herbs. These tasks, once difficult or impossible to perform outside in near darkness, now benefited from the shared illumination of the village. A person filling water at the communal well no longer needed to lean in close or use a personal lantern. A pair of lamps kept near the well brightened the area just enough for people to draw water safely and without rush. In farms located slightly outside villages, the change was equally meaningful. Lamps placed at strategic points near barns or storage buildings allowed farmers to finish tending animals after sunset if necessary. Though they still preferred daylight for major tasks, the added flexibility proved useful during busy seasons or sudden needs. A farmer walking between the barn and the house at night could now follow faint glows placed along the path rather than walking purely by memory or moonlight. Over time, brighter evenings also influenced architecture in subtle ways. Builders designing new homes or workshops started placing doorways and windows so they faced areas with communal lamps. This allowed the small flame inside a home to connect visually with the glow outside, creating smoother paths of movement. Storage spaces, once positioned anywhere, were now often placed closer to routes with consistent illumination. Even the shape of some streets changed slightly, redirecting walkways toward areas that benefited from shared light. Another change came from communication and cooperation. Because evening no longer forced complete retreat, people found more opportunities to speak with neighbors about plans, tasks, or shared responsibilities. Discussions about repairs, harvest scheduling, or small disputes were easier to conduct when people could gather calmly after work, illuminated by nearby lamps. Evening meetings, once rare, gradually became more common. They were never late or long, but they provided valuable time for community coordination. And yet, despite all these changes, the peaceful nature of night remained intact. The lamps were not bright enough to disturb sleep in nearby homes or wash out the stars above. They simply created small pockets of clarity within the broader darkness. Anyone stepping away from these pockets immediately returned to the deep quiet of night, where paths remained dim and the natural world continued its gentle rhythms without interruption. This balance ensured that the arrival of brighter evenings enhanced life without overwhelming it. One of the most remarkable aspects of this transition was how naturally people accepted it. There were no monuments commemorating the first organized lamps, no grand celebrations, no marked shift in history books. Instead, the change blended into daily life so quietly that many people hardly noticed how different the evenings had become. A child growing up during this period might assume the lamps had always been there. An older person might appreciate the convenience without feeling that anything essential had been lost. The transformation was so gradual and so deeply tied to community needs that it unfolded like the slow changing of seasons. In traveling towns, where merchants and visitors moved frequently between regions, the presence of brighter evenings created new impressions. A traveler might remark, "This town keeps lamps near the square," or "They place lights near the gate." These comments spread new ideas, inspiring other communities to copy or adapt similar practices. The evolution of evening lighting spread less through invention than through shared observation. As brighter lamps became a common evening feature, certain rituals developed. In many towns, someone walked the lighting route at dusk, igniting each lamp with practiced gestures. People who saw this often paused for a moment, appreciating the quiet care given to the community. The lighting of the lamps became a visual signal. The day had ended, nighttime life had begun. Likewise, at the end of the evening, lamps were extinguished one by one, marking the slow settling of the town into deep rest. There was a comforting rhythm to this cycle. It connected people to the passage of time in a way that felt soft and reassuring. The glow of the lamps became part of the landscape, something expected, familiar, and quietly beloved. Even those who rarely ventured outside after sunset appreciated their presence, knowing they brought ease and safety to neighbors and travelers. As the decades passed, the idea of brighter evenings laid the groundwork for more advanced forms of lighting. But before we arrive at those innovations, it is important to appreciate the delicate, thoughtful changes of this era. People did not seek to challenge the night. They sought only to coexist with it more comfortably. And through their care, experimentation, and cooperation, they created a timeless balance between darkness and gentle illumination. In the next chapter, we will explore how early towns continued to refine their lighting systems, how certain places moved from simple lamps to larger coordinated efforts, and how these advances influenced the next generation's relationship with the night. The journey from scattered lanterns to true street lighting was not a sudden leap, but a quiet, gradual unfolding. For centuries, communities had relied on soft, scattered points of glow, lanterns hung near doors, lamps placed at wells, and slightly brighter lights positioned along the busiest paths. These small improvements shaped evening life profoundly, yet they still left much of the night untouched. Darkness remained the natural backdrop of every town, and people moved through it with practiced ease. But eventually, as towns expanded and evening activity increased, communities began imagining how light could be placed more intentionally, more consistently, and more widely across public spaces. At the heart of this change was the growing understanding that lighting did not need to be bright to be useful. It only needed to be predictable. A consistent glow along a major path was more helpful than a bright lamp placed in only one spot. A sequence of modest lanterns guiding travelers through a square was more effective than a single large flame that illuminated only its immediate surroundings. Predictability, not brilliance, was the key that unlocked the next stage of evening illumination. Imagine a town approaching this new era. By day, it flourishes with activity, markets bustling, craftsmen working, carts moving steadily along the main road. But at dusk, something new begins to happen. Instead of just lighting a few scattered lamps, the town's designated lighting caretakers, still informal volunteers, follow a more organized route. They move systematically from one point to another, igniting a line of lamps stretching through the town's central path. Each lamp burns steadily, each flame maintained carefully with proper wicks and well-refined oils. The effect is subtle but unmistakable. For the first time, a person standing at one end of the road can look toward the other and see a faint line of light guiding the entire way. The road does not shine brightly. It does not resemble modern streets, but it is outlined, defined by a gentle chain of glows that stretches from one point to another like a quiet constellation brought down to ground level. This shift changes how the community perceives the night. Instead of viewing evening travel as something that must be done slowly and cautiously, people begin to feel a sense of gentle assurance. The night remains calm, but navigation becomes easier. Travelers arriving from distant villages follow the faint line of lamps into town. Those who finish evening tasks at workshops stroll confidently along the outlined path. Even children, who once hurried home before darkness deepened, can now walk with calmer steps as long as they remain on the illuminated route. These early lighting routes reveal something important about human nature. When people sense structure, even in small forms, they adapt quickly. The lamps become markers that shape movement and extend evening routines without disrupting the peaceful character of night. Towns experimenting with these routes make further observations. Lamps burn longer when placed in sheltered spots or near walls. Light spreads more effectively when lamps are mounted at consistent heights. Using identical containers produces steadier flames and easier maintenance. Through countless small adjustments, communities refine their early systems without realizing they are laying the groundwork for something far more structured. The next quiet advancement comes in the form of collaboration between craftspeople and community organizers. Lamp makers refine their designs, creating containers with more efficient shapes. Metalworkers craft protective covers that shield flames from unpredictable drafts. Oil refiners learn to filter out impurities more effectively, producing cleaner burning fuel. None of these changes are revolutionary individually, but together they form a more reliable lighting system than any town had before. As towns continue improving their lamps, they also rethink placement. At first, lamps were installed wherever people felt they were needed most. near important buildings, along major roads, around squares. But soon, the idea of evenly spaced lighting takes hold. People notice that when lamps are too close, they waste fuel. When they are too far apart, the path grows uneven. By experimenting with distances, counting paces, or measuring rope lengths, communities learn to space lamps with surprising precision. This spacing allows travelers to see one lamp from the next, creating a seamless line of guidance through the night. Some ambitious towns even begin creating secondary routes, not as bright as the main path, but still helpful for evening movement. These secondary lights serve as connectors, linking homes to the central road or marking shortcuts that people frequently use. The effect is a simple network of softly lit paths that feels intuitive and welcoming. Another change becomes noticeable in evening life. With more consistent lighting, towns begin seeing an increase in evening gatherings, small, peaceful group activities that were once difficult to organize in pure darkness. People now meet in central squares to exchange news, enjoy mild air, or finish tasks that had stretched into dusk. Children play quietly near the edges of lit paths. Travelers arriving later in the day are greeted not by darkness, but by a steady glow leading them toward welcoming inns. The lamps expand the social landscape of communities without dramatically altering their natural pace. Though important, these changes remain organic, driven by need and shaped through collaboration rather than driven by a grand plan. Even as towns become more accustomed to structured lighting, the systems remain humble, relying entirely on manual care. Each evening, someone must light the lamps. Each morning, they must be extinguished. Maintenance requires steady hands, careful observation, and knowledge passed down quietly through the community. This brings us to one of the most quietly transformative aspects of early street lighting: the rise of dedicated roles. In many towns, certain families or individuals gain reputations for being dependable lamp caretakers. Though not official positions, these roles evolve naturally. People who excel in maintaining lamps are asked to teach others. They develop routines for checking oil supplies, trimming wicks, cleaning glass, and replacing worn-out frames. Some even innovate small improvements. For instance, adding reflective panels behind lamps to amplify their glow or shaping lantern covers to distribute light more evenly. As their work gains recognition, the community begins to see lighting not just as a convenience, but as a shared responsibility built on consistent practice. This cultural shift, though subtle, marks a turning point. Lighting moves from being a handful of scattered flames to a gently maintained system that supports and shapes evening life. Still, this system remains far from the street lighting we know today. It requires constant attention and frequent replacements. Lamps blow out during storms, wicks degrade, and fuel supplies vary seasonally. Communities must constantly adapt to maintain even a modest glow, but these adaptations strengthen communal bonds. People develop a shared investment in the nighttime landscape. The glow of the lamps becomes a symbol of cooperation. As these systems mature, towns become increasingly aware of the limitations of their lamps. Flames flicker unpredictably, fuel supplies fluctuate, and maintenance can be tedious. Yet, instead of viewing these as problems, people treat them as natural characteristics of their lighting, quirks to be understood and respected. This acceptance underscores how deeply night lighting has become part of daily life, even in its imperfect form. These early lighting networks also influence how towns grow. People begin building new homes closer to illuminated routes. Shops set up near well-lit paths, knowing customers move more confidently where light is present. Community buildings gravitate towards squares where lamps create natural gathering spaces. The lamps shape the town's development quietly, guiding expansion just as they guide footsteps. Travelers passing through describe certain towns as bright, even though the illumination remains dim by modern standards. What they mean is that the lighting is reliable, visible from afar, recognizable in pattern, and comforting in atmosphere. For people accustomed to navigating the night by moonlight alone, the sight of a well-lit town feels remarkable. This era becomes a bridge, connecting the ancient world of purely natural darkness with the emerging world of structured evening illumination. Towns remain peaceful, nights remain gentle, and people continue to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. But the glow of lamps, organized, maintained, and softly guiding, marks the first true step toward the street-lit world to come. And yet, even in this era of evolving illumination, communities remain mindful of balance. They do not seek to overwhelm the night or erase its quiet beauty. Instead, they aim simply to accompany it, to create a partnership between darkness and light that supports evening life while preserving the serenity that has always defined nighttime. In the next chapter, we will explore how communities moved from these early systems to more ambitious experiments, how larger towns and cities began planning lighting on a scale that surpassed anything seen before, paving the way for the first true street lamp networks of history. By the time communities had grown accustomed to their soft chains of public lamps, the night had already changed in subtle, meaningful ways. People walked with more confidence. Market squares remained lively a little longer. Travelers recognized towns from a distance by their faint glimmer. And yet, despite all these improvements, the world was still living in an era where light relied entirely on individual flames, each lamp needing a hand to ignite it, each wick requiring careful trimming, each frame demanding regular cleaning. The systems were useful, but they depended deeply on human effort and attention. The transformation toward the age of true street lamps began not with sudden invention, but with gradual shifts in community needs. As towns expanded into cities and cities stretched beyond their old boundaries, the limitations of flame-based illumination became more noticeable. Streets, once short and tightly woven around central squares, grew longer. Homes and workshops spread outward. Travelers approached from farther distances. Markets expanded to accommodate more sellers. Evening gatherings became more common, and new forms of work required slightly extended hours. The soft glow of traditional lamps, though comforting, could no longer fully support these growing rhythms. To understand the final steps towards structured street lighting, imagine a city in this transitional period. It is larger than a village, divided into several districts, each with its own character. The central market square is vibrant during the day, filled with carts, stalls, and workers. But the narrow streets that lead away from it are unevenly lit. Some are lined with community lanterns maintained regularly, while others fade into darkness because volunteers cannot reach them consistently. People still navigate using memory, but the gaps between lit and unlit areas become more prominent. In response, city leaders and community groups begin considering new possibilities. They recognize that lighting styles must evolve alongside the city itself. Discussions begin, not about replacing the peaceful atmosphere of night, but about bringing consistency, structure, and predictability to evening life. These conversations spark new experiments designed to push flame-based lighting further than ever before. Larger lamps become the first step. Some communities begin crafting lanterns capable of holding more fuel, producing longer-lasting flames. These larger lamps, when placed along major roads, offer broader illumination than earlier lanterns while still maintaining the gentle flicker that defines nighttime ambience. They also reduce the need for constant refilling, easing the burden on those responsible for maintenance. Another advancement emerges in the form of improved lamp posts. Instead of simple wooden stakes, communities invest in taller, sturdier posts crafted by skilled workers. These posts elevate lanterns higher above ground, allowing light to spread further. When placed at consistent intervals, the lamps illuminate stretches of road more effectively, guiding travelers with a more continuous path of glow. Even though the flames remain modest, the elevation alone creates a notable increase in visibility. Cities also begin to establish more formal lighting routines. Instead of relying entirely on volunteers, certain individuals are appointed, still informally, but more consistently, to manage lighting duties. These people walk the lighting routes at dusk, carrying neatly organized bundles of wicks, tools for trimming, and small containers of oil. Their work becomes a predictable part of city life. Residents hear their footsteps and recognize the soft scrape of lamps being opened and lit. These appointed caretakers become respected members of the community, known not for authority, but for quiet usefulness. With maintenance becoming more organized, cities start expanding lighting routes. Major thoroughfares, the roads connecting markets, gates, and residential districts, receive priority. Lights are spaced carefully using measurements that were refined over many years of practice. When travelers see these evenly spaced glows stretching into the distance, they gain a new sense of orientation. Roads that once faded abruptly into shadows now carry lines of faint illumination that extend far beyond the town center. Business owners, too, begin to adapt their evening habits. Workshops that once closed rigidly at sunset now stay open slightly longer, taking advantage of improved lighting outside. Merchants who once hurried customers out before dusk now feel comfortable finishing sales under the glow of nearby lamps. Innkeepers appreciate the increased visibility that guides travelers to their doors without confusion. Evening trade remains modest, but it becomes smoother and more relaxed. These changes influence architecture as well. Builders designing new streets consider where lamps might best be placed. They leave small indents in walls for mounting lanterns. They position buildings so doorways meet illuminated paths. They create wider spaces in markets to accommodate larger public lamps. Even water channels or drainage paths are aligned more thoughtfully to avoid disrupting lighting routes. City layouts, once shaped entirely by terrain and tradition, now begin incorporating illumination into their designs. Despite these advancements, flame-based systems remain fragile. Rain extinguishes lamps. Wind demands protective shielding. Fuel supplies fluctuate based on season and trade. Some cities suffer shortages. Others experiment with alternative oils or wick materials. These challenges teach communities to strategize, to store fuel carefully, craft spare containers, and build shelters around lampposts. City lighting becomes a blend of engineering, craftsmanship, and daily habit. Yet even with these improvements, another realization emerges. Flame light, no matter how efficiently arranged, can only go so far. Flames flicker. Flames extinguish. Flames require tending. And in growing cities, where streets expand across wide distances, the number of lamps increases to a point where maintenance becomes overwhelming. Larger lamps ease the load but cannot eliminate the need for constant care. This realization is the quiet spark that drives communities toward exploring new possibilities. They do not abandon their flame systems. Far from it. These lamps remain beloved and essential. But towns begin inviting craftspeople, tinkerers, and thinkers to imagine what might come next. These early innovators do not seek to disrupt the peaceful night. They simply want to find ways to maintain light more reliably, more consistently, and with less daily labor. Conversations grow around the idea of more enduring illumination, systems capable of shining longer, brighter, or more steadily without constant refueling. People experiment with more efficient oil mixtures. They design lanterns with improved ventilation that reduce smoke and dimming. They craft mirrored surfaces capable of reflecting light outward. Some even begin exploring mounted torches with special covers designed to burn longer without scattering sparks. Bit by bit, the experiments show promise. Lamps begin to last through longer portions of the evening. Light spreads more evenly. Travel becomes easier even in districts farther from the central square. Communities begin hiring craftsmen to specialize in lamp making, elevating the trade into a respected local profession. As cities embrace these advancements, the cultural meaning of evening changes. No longer does nightfall signal the end of all activities. People take short walks along illuminated routes after supper. Neighbors visit one another with leisure. Small performances or seasonal celebrations occasionally occur near well-lit squares. Life does not become fast-paced. It simply gains a new layer of comfort within the soft boundaries of darkness. External visitors notice these changes. A traveler from a distant region might remark on how bright a city seems at night, even though the illumination remains gentle by modern standards. The glow becomes part of the city's identity, a sign of hospitality, safety, and community care. These developments mark the final steps of a long evolution. From handheld lanterns to coordinated routes, from scattered glows to structured lighting networks, the stage is set for the next transformation. Before long, new ideas, powered not by flame alone, but by emerging materials and methods, will rise quietly into the world. The age of true street lamps still lies ahead, but its foundation has been carefully prepared by generations of small improvements, experiments, and shared efforts. And through all of this, the essence of night remains unchanged, quiet, calming, and full of gentle rhythm. People do not seek to overpower it. They simply seek to move within it with a little more ease, comfort, and connection. And so, our quiet journey through the darkness comes to an end. A journey where night was not something to fear or fight, but a calm companion that shaped entire centuries of life. Before street lamps existed, people lived in harmony with the evening, walking slower, speaking softer, trusting memory and moonlight, and carrying small glowing flames that softened their world step by step. We wandered through villages built close for comfort, walked along roads guided by personal lanterns, watched communities craft their first shared lights, and saw how these gentle glows grew into organized nighttime paths. Nothing changed overnight. There were no sudden inventions or loud revolutions, just countless small improvements. Tiny flames placed with care, lamps tended by steady hands, communities working together quietly to make the night a little easier, a little safer, a little more welcoming. These early lights were humble, but they shaped the future. They laid the foundation for the bright streets we take for granted today. And yet, something about those old evenings remains timeless. The peaceful rhythm, the slow pace, the soft glow that never tried to conquer darkness, only to coexist with it. Thank you for drifting through history with me tonight. If this calm journey helped you relax, unwind, or fall asleep, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment about where you re-watching from or which era you'd like to explore next. Your support keeps this peaceful series alive. Sleep well, and until next time, good night.